everybody. Before we jump into today's episode, we have two sponsors we want to say thank you to for supporting this show. The first one is Routine. You guys have heard me talk about Routine, honestly, back from the early days of the podcast, and it's still a product I use every single morning. They have a prompt for me here. I'm going to do a little impromptu on this ad read today because honestly, this is a product that I truly believe in. And so I'm just going to tell you guys exactly what I think and why. First and foremost, this is a stat that they shared, but when you sleep, you lose between a pound and a half of water. And most of that's just sweating while you sleep. I used to not know if that was actually true, to be honest. I felt like a pound to a pound and a half of water seemed like quite a bit while I slept. But the one thing I did constantly pay attention to when I started using Routine was just the fact that before using Routine, I always felt a little dehydrated in the morning. And I'm one of those people that when I get up really early usually. I work out. One of the first things I do is some form of fitness. It's just like what I do before everyone's awake. And so it's very easy for me to grab a coffee, pre-workout, an energy drink, something with caffeine in it, and just go. When I am good about using Routine, first, I basically they come in these little single serve packets. They contain half an organic lemon, a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, Himalayan sea salt, all 6 essential electrolytes, and they have no sugar in them at all. A lot of hydration products are going to have sugar. So one of the things about Routine that I love is that there's no sugar in there. So when I am good about doing this consistently, I will take one of those single serve packets, I'll throw it in my mixer bottle, and whether I also put in a pre-workout or something with caffeine or I just drink that separately, I try to drink that first. And the days I do that, I do genuinely feel hydrated and just have a different form of clarity all morning. A lot of people have tried to make their own homemade versions of Routine, right? You see people they take a shot of the apple cider vinegar, they put a little sea salt, a little lemon in a drink. This is essentially that, but in a product that you can take with you on the go, have it ready for you first thing in the morning. I know me personally, when I'm groggy rolling out of bed, the last thing I want to do is, squeeze a lemon, cut lemons up, go get the apple cider vinegar, find my sea salt. I just rip this packet open, throw it in my water, drink it, and it's good to go. You can try yours today. If you haven't tried it yet and you've been listening to this podcast for years, just try the damn Routine. Give it a shot. You can use code ShaneWhite30 and get 30% off your first order. So you get 30% off by using code ShaneWhite30 and go to yourroutine.com. To make it even easier, I've added the link to yourroutine.com in the show notes. So just click on the show notes for this episode, click on the link to yourroutine.com, and don't forget to use code ShaneWhite30. All right, guys, today's episode is also brought to you by NeuroRoast. Again, I'm going to go a little off script here. NeuroRoast is a product that I also came across during this year of 2023. They are a coffee company that's helping you optimize your brain function and overall well-being. This is another product that, to be honest with you, when I first started working with it, I was a little on the fence. I was like, do I really want to have mushrooms in my coffee? Well, folks, I will tell you, when I use NeuroRoast, one of the things that has stood out to me the most is I'll back up. People that know me know that I have way too much caffeine, typically. One of the things this year I've done a good job of is cutting out alcohol. Not completely, but predominantly, I don't touch a lot of alcohol anymore. What I think I've actually done the other way, though, is add a lot more caffeine. So I do definitely drink too much caffeine. That's something I need to work on next year, is to try to minimize how much of that. But NeuroRoast is something that has actually helped me because of the way they've formulated their coffee. Like, unlike regular coffee, which is, still something I consume, but NeuroRoast specifically doesn't cause jitters or crashes. Mushroom coffee provides more balance and sustained energy, allowing you to stay focused and productive throughout the day. So the times I do use NeuroRoast, I'll be honest, I just don't feel that jittery, like, I'm jumping out of my chair or standing here at my desk jumping around feeling. So give NeuroRoast a try. They have some really good flavors. I'll be honest too, the two guys that started NeuroRoast are just really good dudes based out of New York, and they're hustling, and hopefully they can get some people to try NeuroRoast this holiday season by listening to this podcast. So for you folks who've been on the fence, I'm telling you, it tastes delicious. They've done a fantastic job of making this coffee not only be functional, but taste fantastic. And if you want to try NeuroRoast, you can use code ShaneWhite. So it's super simple, just ShaneWhite at checkout. you'll also get 30% off. So if you go to neuroroast.com, and once again, I have added that to the show notes. So just click into the show notes while you're listening to this episode. You can click on NeuroRoast link directly. Don't forget to use code just Shane White, and you'll get 30% off your order. Hope you guys love both these products. I'm trying to not only bring you guys products that I use, but that I believe in on the podcast. I'm not taking ad reads for any brands that I don't really believe in. So anyway, hope you guys love both those products, yourroutine.com and neuroroast.com. I've added those links to the show notes. I hope you guys love it. And I got an awesome guest coming up right after this.
Hey everyone, we are officially on episode number 6 as a part of the NoBul mini-series that we've been publishing as of late. This short episode, we're actually going to focus on obviously a major portion of what we do, a major portion of what drives growth for not only our clients, but basically all brands on Amazon, and that's advertising. So for those who may not be familiar with advertising as a whole, I'll mostly kick it over to Shane on this one. So Shane, why don't we start there in terms of just like Amazon advertising 101. What is it? Where is it?
Yeah, good. Nice job on the moderation and like the intro. Yeah. That was great. Good job, dude.
Yeah.
Picking this up.
Should start a podcast.
You should start a podcast. You should totally do a podcast. All right. So advertising. What is advertising? The best way, and I realized future episodes, we can screen share on here. We could do that. It'd be great to show some people some things on Amazon.
Yeah.
For advertising specifically, the best way to describe what it is, there's lots of different little mechanisms and different ways to do this, but the simplest way to describe it is, let's just use protein bars, for example. If you were to go to the search bar when you start on Amazon, you search protein bar, the first few items that show up, you have to pay really close attention. But if there's an item that does not say this little gray sponsored by the title, that's just organically showing up. That's Amazon deciding that whatever keyword you used, that item is the most likely item to convert a sale. And so they're showing you that item first. However, when you do see sponsored, that means that brand is paying for that placement. And what does that mean? The brand is physically behind the scenes paying to show up when you search the word protein bar. So that's what advertising is. At scale, you can imagine there's endless things you could bid on. You can also, as we've talked about on here in previous episodes, you can use videos and images in your own products. You can compete against other brands' products. So there's a ton of different ways.
We should say bidding to show up there, right? Because you're actually not paying to show up there. You're bidding to show up there, and then if you get clicked, you're paying because it's a cost per click system, right?
Great call. Yeah, you don't pay when someone sees that ad. So just by seeing sponsored, the brand's not paying for it. But if you do click on it, they get billed. And depending on supply and demand and how much that keyword costs at that moment, which is an ongoing, ever-changing number, then yes, great call. The brand then pays every time you click on that. So if you don't want to buy something and you know the brand, don't click on their sponsored ad placement. Otherwise,
can you speak a bit more? So like the placements and where the ads show up, I think is hopefully somewhat clear to people listening now. But can you talk a little bit about how that bidding process works?
Yeah, great call. So the bidding process in and of itself is, I'll try to put it into the simplest, most easy layman's terms. So first and foremost, you create things called campaigns, which you decide the targeting type. So like I said, a few different ones there. And then ultimately you're going all the way down to decide which of your products are going to show up against which keywords or products or groups. You can also do audience targeting. So literally, if you're building out a campaign, you're going through and deciding, and there's a million different ways people build campaigns and organize them. But I'll use protein bar as the continued example here. You might create a campaign where you're bidding on protein bar, protein bars, high protein bar, and you're deciding on each keyword which product you want to show up. So there's you could probably do a whole other episode on it. There's a ton of different ways that you'd want to have different products show up and reasons for that. But at its simplest form, that's how you set it up. And then, like I said, the bid prices, Amazon will show you, today what they're suggesting you use as the bid price. And the suggestion would mean it's kind of in the median of people who are currently bidding on that keyword. There might be a range of $2 to $4 a click, which means for every click, like Kyle just mentioned, we would have to pay anywhere from $2 to $4 to win that placement and ultimately have you click on it. And then Amazon might say, hey, our suggestion is $3.25. And so that just means, given the supply and demand and what everyone else bidding is willing to pay, if you want to win that bid, they're suggesting you at least put 325. It doesn't mean if you put 325 and enter that you're automatically going to win. Depends on a few different factors, but
So
ultimately,
it kind of works like an eBay bidding system, right? It's like if the minimum bid is $1.25 for the keyword, and you bid $1.25, but the next closest brand or person who's bidding on that keyword is only bidding $1, you would pay $1.01, not $1.25.
theoretically, yes. A little bit of nuance would be a good example. Instead of, eBay, you're buying an item once. This is like there's an item being sold every minute. The only other the reason this gets a little more complicated is, if you, like in my example, if you put 325, there might be people bidding 350, 375, $4, but then those people also have a budget amount. So at some point during the day, they could also run out of budget. And all of a sudden, even though you were bidding less, now you're at the front of the line because those people that were bidding more ran out of money. It's a good way to describe it. And so that's why you have to pay attention to it every day, is because there's a lot of times where you'll win things with lower bid prices than you thought you could. Or sometimes it's the other way where people have plenty of budget and they're bidding up more and more, and your 325 doesn't get you to the front of the line at all.
Yeah, I think one thing that you and I have certainly learned, and even hearing you talk about just barely scraping the surface of everything that goes into building a successful ad campaign, and then obviously building a successful ad strategy that has hundreds of campaigns, you can go so deep into advertising. And I know you spend an absolute ungodly amount of time in the platform. Can you speak a little bit to the benefits of kind of being in the weeds, which is kind of our management style, versus there's a ton of them, but more like algorithm AI platforms that automate this process in some shape or form? Because I know we've definitely explored the latter, but have ultimately decided for our business and for our clients, performance is better with us doing it. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, for sure. See, it's funny. When we were planning this podcast, we wanted to focus on that a lot. And I think what you teed up with a little bit of a 101 was great, because it kind of gets to the point of, you can imagine, I just gave the example of one keyword and one campaign. And then as you have multiple clients, or even just with one brand, you could have 100 campaigns or more for, just like you said, managing that obviously becomes a crazy amount of time and energy. So there's the business side of Amazon advertising has turned into, for people listening, there is an ungodly amount of software solutions where they do a lot of promising of quote unquote automating these bid changes, and ultimately how well or how quickly things are happening behind the scenes with advertising to take the load off of you. When we first started NoBul, as you were growing a business, that's an obvious, as we're talking about how much time it took here just to explain one little tweak, you could imagine how much time it can take to work on one brand, let alone multiple. And so that was an obvious one for us. So, we tested a bunch of different types of software along the lines. All of these, what they tend to do is have a true just mathematical decision-making process where if, a certain keyword doesn't hit certain metrics behind the scenes, and without going into what all the metrics of advertising are, there's a few key ones that if you know much about advertising, ROAS, ACOS, those are really the two big ones that these software providers will focus on. They do a lot of, I call it like turning on and turning off quickly. So for example, if you're bidding on protein bar and you get a couple clicks and no sales, some of these software options, they'll turn things off too quick. Is really, like, in layman's terms, the simplest way to provide a background of what they do. The goal of their software is always to minimize your spend and improve your efficiency, or ROAS and ACOS. The problem with a lot of that is there's a human element, and Kyle and I always try to map out, like, what does the human element mean? Well, it means, for, let's just say again, a protein bar brand, there might be a competitor where we want to conquest them, which just means when someone searches another brand, we want our brand to show up right there next to them, because we think our consumer will like our product more than the other product. So there could be periods of time, and this is a very specific situation, and all of our brands have at least a few handfuls of these specific situations, which is why software is tough to use, in my opinion, where maybe this week, this month, us targeting that competitor, it does not pass the sniff test of performance that we would say, hey, let's keep bidding on this, just from like an obvious math perspective. But it's an important target to keep targeting. And so we've gone back to the manual process that we've developed over the years, because ultimately there's such a human element to advertising, and the data is constantly changing. If you let a software we always call it set it and forget it, where you just let the software you think run its course and do its thing, it tends to completely alter what you're spending the time and money on. Most brands would be surprised. the goal of them, because obviously they want you to keep paying the monthly fee to use the software. So they want to get your ROAS up and your ACoS down. Well, what's the easiest way to do that? It's to only spend on things that convert on high returning keywords and targets. And what that tends to do is push a lot of category and competitor targets out and really focus only on branded keywords. So for our XBAR, for example, right, it would all of a sudden over a month or two, 3-4 months, you'll dive in and see, hey, why are so many of the things we're targeting just our own branded keyword and so little category and competitor? And so manually, we can control those buckets. We can say, hey, 30% of our spend should go to category targets like protein bar. 20% should go to other competitor targets, and divvy it up and go that way. What we've seen is our performance is better, growth happens faster, overall top line capabilities and how big we can make the advertising sales goes up, and ultimately like the success from a profit and overall sales perspective tends to be on a much higher profitable trajectory than what we would see when we use a lot of these softwares in our experience.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I would add to there is because of the kind of service we offer, where it's quote unquote for full service management of Amazon accounts, where we're obviously in charge of the advertising campaigns as we're talking about now, but we're also in charge of top line sales, we're in charge of content, we're in charge of demand planning, producing shipments. So a tweak that's made in advertising that is going to impact a demand plan, you and I are obviously tied at the hip to that, where those software systems obviously they're not ingrained in what's actually going on with your business or even potentially what your goals of the business are. So they're kind of making decisions, or you would say the software is making the decision in a bit of a vacuum.
Yeah, that's sorry, I was to say that's just a really key part to really hone in on. Is Kyle and I have obviously worked, if you know anything about us, we've worked at enormous organizations. So it might be a little different when you're up at that scale where the teams are already so siloed and they're looking at different data sources. You don't have like a few people really pulling all the levers. For us and what we're trying to achieve at NoBul, it's really unlocking profitable growth for brands that are, in the beginning or the growth stage of their Amazon business. And so what we think is that extra in the weeds, being a part of every decision when it comes to advertising, like Kyle said, also knowing how much product specifically we're getting over there to back up what we're doing in advertising. That using multiple software solutions most of the time really disconnects and silos those decision making.
A brand spending $10 million a year between search advertising and maybe DSP within Amazon at scale. That there's no way that they wouldn't be able to use a software. They'd have to hire 15 people to run those campaigns probably.
Sure.
One last quick question, and then we'll wrap things up for the short conversation today. Shane and I, obviously, just being in the industry for as long as we have, we've audited many accounts. From an advertising perspective, Shane, what would you say are like the top 2 things that we flag to clients that we audit?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because you can kind of do an audit for yourself if you wanted to. Yeah, the best way, or the big things that we call out, and you can do this by pulling down a sponsored ads report anywhere. Love to look at a few really, really big things. The obvious ones are just over the time frame, how much are we spending? What have sales been? What is the ROAS and ACoS? So just like this is the highest of the high metrics that you should know off the top of your head. But then what goes into that usually is cost per click. So like what's the average we've been spending? And Kyle and I just know from working in different categories in food and beverage, rough idea of what your average cost per click should be if you're having a successful Amazon advertising business. Then we like to dive in and break out categories. So I always love to look at, okay, let's just for easy numbers say we spent $10,000 in the last 30 days. How much of that was branded? That's a really good indication of, are we just searching for people who are searching for us, or are we actually growing category and competitor share? Always like to then kind of go a level deeper to keep it simple for everybody. How much are we bidding on different categories? How much are we bidding against competitors? How is the performance of those metrics I mentioned looking at that level too? Because that can tell us a lot of just the health of competitor targeting, how well we do in the categories we play in. And then there's a new one that I would actually say Kyle and I have coined. This is a funny one. We just have come up with it from a more of a math angle than anything else. So we call it leaky spend. And leaky spend would just be, look at all of your keywords, all of your targets across your last 30 days. If anything has driven a click, so you've spent at least a penny or more on a keyword, but it's never driven a sale, take the amount of keywords that would fall into quote unquote leaky spend and divide that by the total amount of keywords that you're bidding on. So let's just say you're bidding on 1,000 keywords and 400 of them would fall into leaky spend. That means your leaky spend rate's 40%. Most brands that we audit are shocked at how high that percentage is. And really what that means, it doesn't necessarily mean whoever's running your advertising is doing a bad job. I always like to say that first. I mean, Kyle and I have a threshold where we like to be, it ranges, but I would love to see every brand that we work with be, south of 30-ish%. And there's definitely some caveats to that metric. But ultimately what that's saying is there's a group of keywords that you're bidding on that either you're spending that you shouldn't be spending on. That's an obvious one. That can be you're just not turning keywords off that are poor performers that have hit a threshold.
20
that
clicks,
threshold's different.
no sales.
Like if that's happening, either one of two things. One, you're pushing on purpose, and hopefully you know that, and you call that, we would call that a test, and we're doing it for a reason. Or someone's just not catching it through their optimization process. So those are obvious ones. But then usually, if I had if someone's watching this, you'd see a chart where up here at the top, it's like these bars that are really high, and then you have this really long tail of really low spend across the majority of your keywords. When people have high leaky spend, we tend to see that where let's say out of 1,000 keywords, I said, and let's say your leaky spend rate was 70%, out of 700 leaky keywords, we see some brands that have 400, 500 keywords that have less than $10 in total spend. So they've got a couple clicks. We call that like purgatory. So like these keywords have never gotten enough love to see if they can get 10, 20, 30 clicks and convert a bunch of sales, or get that many clicks and not. And so at least if it's a good or bad target. And so what Kyle and I are always trying to do, and this is something software, from at least my perspective on all the different softwares we've looked at, does not do a good job of and doesn't seem to be able to figure out how to do this. There's a process we run through where we're constantly trying to mine through our leaky spend and push the keywords that we think have an opportunity to do well. And so, hopefully that answers your question. As you know, I geek out on this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for everyone listening, Shane and I purposely try to keep these no longer than 15 minutes. And advertising on Amazon is something that, Amazon holds conferences every year just on advertising, and those conferences are 3 days. So summarizing this in 15 minutes is a little bit difficult. But I think the headlines for me, for people who are listening to this, is this set it and forget it mentality just does not work. You have to be in the weeds. We've tried softwares. We've proved through metrics that our manual process, the majority of the time, is outperforming that. But even in the instances where it's not, you have a much more organized, insight deliverable advertising setup, where I could look at those campaigns as an advertiser who's manually managing it and saying, hey, here's what's working, ding, 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 here's what's not. Where if you look at campaigns that are ran by softwares, it's nearly impossible at a high level within 15 minutes for an investor, for building a deck, to be able to look at that and say, here's what's working, here's what's not. So I would just caution brands that are using some kind of software, if the expectation was set that you work with us as a software company, you can set it and never look at it again. Unfortunately, we've pretty confident that that's not the case.
Yeah. And a lot of the software, I would say too, you and I experienced this where a lot of the software, they maybe do one or two things that are kind of cool and flashy, but then you have to manage the software. And so you're still managing Campaign Manager and Amazon. And then you're also trying to figure out how you manage the software. And so you end up making more work for yourself. So if anyone has questions on that too, that could be a whole, happy to answer, the ones we've tried, the ones we've liked, all that kind of stuff. If you want to reach out, we'd be happy to give you the lowdown.
There's definitely one specifically that we like, which is kind of like a not at all a full automation software. You've had the founder on your show as well. So if anyone has any questions or if they found this interesting, please reach out to us. We'd love to talk more about this. As Shane said, he geeks out on it. I can be dangerous at times with it as well. So hope you guys enjoyed listening, and we'll talk to you guys soon.